The office which you see here is now vacant. It is supposed to be cleaned out. An attempt to do so has already been made. Even after this attempt, however, the office is still not empty by any means. A connected telephone still sits where it always has, indicating the available lines. Pictures still hang on the wall, and the most essential office tools remain on the desk, which will seemingly never leave. Perhaps it is difficult to clean out an office where nearly 20 years of a 67-year career was spent. This is the career of Karl Wilson Blanchard, one of the greatest trial lawyers to practice in the town of Joplin, Missouri. With an impeccable work ethic, strong moral judgment, and a consistency in understanding the law, Karl Blanchard distinguished himself as Joplin's most prestigious attorney. Karl was born on August 2, 1915, in Chillicothe, Missouri. His father was Carl Mercer Blanchard, a bank vice president whose motto was that money follows work, and if you really wanted to be successful, you had to work for it. His mother was Zelma Gurley Blanchard, an extremely intelligent woman who was tough when it came to disciplining her children, but soft when it came to loving them. Karl spent most of his childhood in Chillicothe, though when he entered senior high, the Great Depression had hit the Midwest. The bank that his father worked for had closed, forcing the Blanchard family to relocate. They found a new home in Memphis, Tennessee, where Karl attended high school while also having a part-time job to help support his family. The job paid only 5 cents an hour, but that was enough to teach Karl the value of saving money. Karl attended the University of Missouri in Columbia, where he received his A.B. degree. Karl went on to attend the law school there, receiving his LL.B. degree in the graduating class of 1940.
I was in school with Bob Seiler, Robert Eldridge Seiler, later a judge on the Supreme Court. We were fraternity brothers, and when I guess during my senior year, I came to Joplin. At that time, he had been in the office of Grover James. Grover was probably had more business than any Joplin lawyer. He represented Empire District, the water company. He represented at least one bank, maybe two. He had a big practice. When Mr. James died, Seiler needed some help. And I was looking for some place to start up, and he suggested I come to Joplin, which I did. And he employed me as an associate.
James was either retiring or in ill health or had died, and Seiler invited Dad to come down. And essentially Dad started out as an associate and was actually for a while Seiler's associate, essentially.
When I started in the law business with Seiler, I was just a claim adjuster.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound very glamorous, but...
For 2 years, Karl did the grunt work as an associate with Seiler. It was not long, however, before an opportunity presented itself to him when in 1942 he realized that he and Seiler would be drafted for their services in World War II.
Bob and Dad wanted to have something to come back to. They were both had gone into ROTC. They were reserve officers, so I mean they were single. and Herb Van Fleet was married with 2 young kids. And he was not going to be drafted and didn't have to go. He was a lawyer. He's practicing, I think, in Carthage. And they approached Herb, and in February of 1942, the firm of Seiler, Blanchard, and Van Fleet was formed.
Immediately after the formation of the legendary partnership, Karl left Joplin to pursue matters of life and death. His first stop was to Paris, Tennessee, to marry his college sweetheart, Margaret Ellen Peebles. From there, where Karl went was up to Uncle Sam. Karl served as operations officer of the 2nd Engineer Brigade in the Southwest Pacific, and later as the brigade executive officer in the occupation force. When Karl returned to Joplin with Margaret Ellen in 1945, the things that took priority for Karl were building a home, starting a family, and of course going back to work. Seiler, Blanchard, and Van Fleet operated on the 8th floor of the First National Bank building. The firm primarily handled insurance cases, and it was not long before it became one of the most prestigious in the area as it earned the respect of its competitors.
Beginning in 1953 and continuing until 1974, when I was appointed to the Missouri Court of Appeals at Springfield, my professional life involved Karl Blanchard to a very great extent. And that, of course, included his partnership of Seiler, Blanchard, and Van Fleet. Most of my dealings with that firm were with Bob and Karl. We tried many cases, usually representing co-defendants, but I defended some cases in which the Blanchard firm represented the plaintiff, and on a few occasions the other way around.
I never worked with Karl. We were always on opposite sides. I don't recall us ever sharing a lawsuit where we were both aligned against a common enemy. So my experience is with Karl as an adversary, and a very dangerous adversary, I might say.
But anytime you were in a trial with what we then called the Seiler Blanchard firm, you knew that their representation of their client would be top-notch. Both Bob and Karl and the rest of the lawyers in that firm were excellent finders of the underlying facts, and lawsuits turned upon the evidence and the facts, and there's no substitute for a thorough investigation.
Attention to detail, advanced preparation. He did not come in cold into the courtroom. You knew darn well he was loaded for bear, and you better keep your eyes on him, or you'd be in the bear trap. So
I remember when Bob was city attorney of Joplin, which was years ago, the phone number of the Blanchard of the Seiler firm was 1. A rather distinguished telephone number.
Karl had to work nearly 12 hours a day, every day, in order to help his firm achieve such a distinction. His desk would often be covered with stacks and stacks of papers, which he had to read thoroughly, understand, and sometimes memorize, so that he had all the facts when it came time to go to court.
And you worked all day. Oh, it depended on what you had to, what a court appearances you had to make, whether you were trying a lawsuit. If you were trying a lawsuit, you worked pretty hard.
Dad would come home, and he and Mom would talk, and she'd cook dinner, and we'd eat dinner. And sometimes Dad would, after dinner, Dad would get in the car and go back to the office. Sometimes he'd lay down and take a nap and go back to the office. I was always in bed before Dad came home.
Of course, you're taking, one reason is that you're representing someone that has all of the facts or knows what, you don't know any of the facts, so you've got to educate yourself in whatever kind of a lawsuit it is. You've got to educate yourself on what the facts are in this particular, that involve this particular lawsuit. And takes a little while to do that.
The firm grew fast from Blanchard and Seiler's return in 1945 to the 1960s, when the fourth partner, Malcolm Robertson, was recruited. In 1967, the firm was given one of the greatest honors and at the same time suffered one of its greatest losses when founding partner Seiler was appointed to the Supreme Court of Missouri. Blanchard and Van Fleet said goodbye to their friend and partner and agreed to continue to pursue the business without Seiler. By the 1980s, the firm titled Blanchard, Van Fleet, Robertson, and Dermott was almost the largest firm in Joplin, and led by the two senior partners, still kept the same standards and work ethic of the early years.
Yeah, I finished law school in 1983, and I had interviewed first with them during Christmas in 1982, and so I came to Joplin in '82, and we went into Karl's office, and kind of everybody was in there, and it was probably like December 23rd or 24th, and so I kind of sat around, and I'm sort of interviewing, but I'm sort of just kind of like, getting to know everybody. And Karl kind of says, well, what do you think you're going to be able to do here? I'm like, I don't know. I assume practice law and figure it out. And then Herb Van Fleet piped up and said, well, how much are you going to pay us to train you? And I wasn't sure if he wasn't serious about that.
When I started, we were open every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock until noon and had to wear a coat and tie even on Saturday. But again, the things that stand out in my mind is appearance, how you dressed, how you came to work, the amount of time that you worked, and again, the overriding issue was to do justice, to represent your client, but it wasn't necessarily to make a buck as fast as you could. And the Karl and, to my experience, Herb Van Fleet and Seiler and Johnny Martin all had those traits about them.
When I came with the firm, I received a list of items which the firm expected of me. And it's entitled What We Expect of an Associate. And it's a list of 15 different items. And as you read down through these items, you get a feel for the fervor with which the partners work, because they set the example, they set the pace, and they didn't expect us to do anything they didn't do. And I'll just quickly read through these. One was keep accurate daily time sheets. Two, read the advance sheets promptly. The advance sheets were paperback versions of the cases recently decided by the appellate courts, and so that would keep us current on the law. Three, work whatever hours are required to keep work and dictation current. Four, expect to work nights, Saturday afternoons, Sundays, and holidays when necessary.
A local attorney would tell his secretary that if she could have the Friday after Thanksgiving or Christmas Eve off if Karl Blanchard was not going to be working. But if Karl Blanchard was working, then she had to work also, because he thought that was the criteria for a diligent office, was to do what Karl Blanchard thought needed to be done.
5, arrive at the office for work at 8:30 a.m. 6, no regular coffee hour.
We had a coffee pot, but he was reluctant to have a coffee pot or sodas in the office, because he thought that we were all there to work and there was little time for chit-chat or coffee breaks.
7, engage in social civic and political activities, but not to where it interferes with the work of the office. 8, be willing to make careful and detailed investigations regardless of hour of day or night or weather.
The winter was brutal. We had a lot of snow. And I remember driving to work one day. I had this really beat up Mustang with no heat. And so I put on my suit, because we wore suits, because he wore suits. And then I put on my ski wear on top of it. So I had on like bib overall ski stuff, and then a ski jacket and a hat. And I put a shovel in the back of the car just in case I needed to shovel my way out. And it was still snowing. And I got to work, and we were there. It was on a Friday. It was like 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And Karl came down the hall in these massive hunting boots, and all his over gear and all the really heavy stuff on. And he came down the hall saying, "It's neither fit for man nor beast," and told us, we need to go home. You guys need to go on home. It's neither fit for man nor beast.
9, be prompt in getting on claims. 10, don't hesitate to ask questions if you do not understand what is wanted. 11, read How to Control the Human Element in Claim Handling and Elsewhere by Harvey Highball. 12, own automobile with liability coverage of $25,000 and $50,000 limits. 13, keep office informed at all times as to whereabouts. 14, practice ordinary economies, that is, use care and use of stationery, turn off lights and equipment, don't interrupt secretarial work. 15, make routine check with partner supervising associates work at regular time daily. Some of this was a little bit tongue-in-cheek.
He expected all of the attorneys, if he gave them assignment, if they were to appear on a docket or something like that, and he felt they went unprepared or were late, then they probably would not get another assignment from him to go on that type of mission, because he expected them to be prepared as if he were appearing.
He demanded, not in saying it to you, but in watching him by example, that you always be prepared when you go to court, that if you said something, even if you made a mistake, that you took responsibility for it, you didn't make excuses, that the court and the judges relied on lawyers to be honest and fair with them, and that it was important to do that, and that you get a sense of the case early on and find out what was important and then prepare.
He instilled in me on that you come to work every day, you do your best, and you needed to be at work every day to be able to help your attorney out as far as I was concerned, to make sure that your attorney got his work done and everything. And he was there every day, every weekend, because at that time the secretaries had to work every 3rd Saturday, and he was always there.
I mean, when I started, he was already 70 then, and he came into the office every day like clockwork. I mean, he was always there at 10 o'clock in the morning, and he stayed until 6 p.m. And at that time, he was the founding partner and the senior partner of the firm, and yet he was always very available. I had an office on the 1st floor right next door to Mr. Blanchard, and there was never a time that I wasn't comfortable walking into his office. He would always, whatever he was doing, he had time to listen to whatever legal quagmire I was embroiled in, and he wouldn't just tell me what to do or how to do it, but he would take the time to talk me through it and allow me to come up with a workable solution.
I'd read a book by a very famous Harvard professor named Dershowitz, and he talked about different kinds of lawyers. And Karl fit the mold of one of those lawyers, which was sort of the prestige lawyer, or the sort of the really honorable lawyer, and the guy who his reputation preceded him, so that he always had tremendous credibility. So he had very tremendous credibility with his peers. Whatever he said, that was the deal. You could trust him for it. And at the court, whatever he told the judges was the truth. And he didn't stretch the truth. He didn't strain the analysis. He was very straightforward and down the middle in his analysis. And so he brought that to the firm too, because you were associated with the Blanchard firm. Just because you were associated with the Blanchard firm, when you walked in the door of the courtroom, you had credibility.
The Blanchard firm has kept its credibility to this day, now known as Blanchard, Robertson, Mitchell and Carter. The firm operates in the historic Old Elks Building in Joplin, Missouri, which is a big step up from the 8th floor of the First National Bank building and the little building which the three founding partners built in the 1950s to harbor a few more attorneys. The firm handles primarily defense work in mostly insurance malpractice and personal injury cases, and preserves the values of hard work and integrity set by the founders. The firm is managed by attorney Greg Carter.
We started and for many years were an insurance defense firm, and we've always had in mind that what we do for people is provide them with as good a defense as they can be provided with the talent that's available here. That defense is generally paid for by insurance companies. And we always have in mind that the defense that we provide our clients is one that has to be brought in within a reasonable budget. So we've kind of had the view, and it was instilled long before I got here, that we're going to provide people with straightforward information about the value of their case, the prospect that they're going to win or lose it, what it's going to cost them if they win or lose it, and what it's going to cost them whether we win or lose it.
The spirit of Seiler, Blanchard, and Van Fleet remains, hanging on the wall.
What was your motivation for becoming a lawyer?
Well, one, I was going to be a doctor, but I couldn't dissect a frog very well. I figured if I couldn't dissect a frog, that a human might have some objection to my working on him or her.
When I met Mr. Blanchard, I recognized who I wanted to be like, and I wanted to be like him.
The trait that I admired most about him and the other partners here, and the reason that I went to law school, was his integrity and his honesty. And you didn't have to have things in writing back in those days. If Karl told you, or some of the other partners here, you could rely on what they said.
Well, Karl, the overarching truth is that Karl was honest, was extremely honest. He always put his clients ahead of himself. He was very careful. He always would sit and consider things, and he'd say, I'll sleep on it, I'll think about it. He didn't make real quick decisions. He was very deliberate.
Juries liked him. The judges respected him. When he walked into the court, you knew that Mr. Blanchard was always there on business. He was always very well prepared and handled himself with great dignity.
In dealing with Karl, you found that invariably he was well prepared. He always carried a damn tablet, a yellow tablet, and it just had lines and lines of questions on it. And one of the most distressing things that could happen to me as an opponent was to see that look come over, kind of glance off in the corner of the room, and then like this. You never knew what that was, except it was intended as another arrow in the body of the opponent.
I would go into a deposition with Mr. Blanchard, and he would be deposing my client. And Mr. Blanchard always had a yellow pad. And Mr. Blanchard had an outline of questions and topic and subjects that was in his handwriting and was individualized to that case. And it would start out, one of the things I always noticed that Karl always had name and address, and then he would go down the list of background information. And to this day, when I prepare for depositions, I start out the same way. I put name, address, background information.
anytime he was going to court, he was 100% prepared. He expected everybody to be timely, and he was very intelligent and witty. And he was called upon often to be the MC or master of ceremonies for any kind of event because he added so much humor to the event.
I express our collective thanks to Jeannie and Doc for hosting this delightful occasion. Secondly, I want to express my personal thanks to all those people who have given me suggestions as to this topic today. The principal suggestion, in fact, the sole suggestion, was that it be short.
When I remember Mr. Blanchard, I always remember him being very respectful and very wise and almost stoic, and yet he had a really fun side too. And we didn't see it often, which made it even that much more fun when we did see it. But I remember one year, and I can't remember why, but at the firm we decided to dress up for Halloween, and nobody, at least I, never dreamed that Mr. Blanchard would do it. And he came in on Halloween dressed as one of the Blues Brothers. And, it was just, that was the kind of guy he was. He knew when to work and he knew how to get the job done, but he also had a very fun-loving side.
We started having Christmas luncheons, and we had the names. We would draw names as to who you would buy, and it was always a gag gift. It was never, you could make it nice if you wanted to. But we had one secretary that was real, let's say she was prone to wear short skirts and had hair that was pretty wild, and he got her name. And when she opened his gift, it was a little Barbie skirt. And everybody, including him, just busted out laughing because it was so funny. And you didn't expect that from Mr. Blanchard to be that. But and then I just thought, he pays more attention to what's going on in the office than what you think he did. Because he basically sat in his office and you really didn't see him that often, but he knew exactly what was going on at all times.
The other thing that I remember about Mr. Blanchard was how even-tempered he was. Trial lawyers can be volatile, and it's easy in the heat of battle to kind of get caught up in the emotion. And Mr. Blanchard didn't do that.
He exemplified certain virtues, characteristics that I think are important in not only being a good trial lawyer, but being a good person. Mr. Blanchard had the cornerstones for being a success. He was very industrious. He had the ability and the drive to work hard. And then he liked what he was doing, and I think that if you like what you're doing and you work hard at it, that you'll be successful.
He was generous. If he had a client that he felt couldn't pay the normal fee, he often just charged a very nominal fee in order to make them feel comfortable that they were paying, but he knew that they couldn't pay the usual fees that were charged by attorneys.
I remember one of the first trials that I won. I came back to my office, and stuck to my chair was the cardboard backing from a legal file, and handwritten it said "good job," and in the O of the job it was a smiley face drawn in the O, and I just couldn't, for a minute I just couldn't imagine who would have left that for me. And it was late in the day and everyone was gone except Catherine, who was still out working, and I looked at her and I kind of questioned her, like, do you know where this came from? And she said, Mr. Blanchard left that for you before he left.
Mr. Blanchard, as I found in the practice of law, made very few mistakes. And I can't think of any that he ever made that I can remember. So if he did something that was a mistake, he in my opinion, would be the first to recognize it.
He had a terrific demeanor. I think probably as much as any lawyer in Joplin, he was respected by his peers. He always showed great deference to the court. I was amused one day he came to court after I was on the bench, and of course I had come to work for him as a young lawyer. He knew me on a first-name basis, but whenever he came to court, he always paid deference to the office, not necessarily to me. And one day he came with one of our former secretaries, who had been mine, who called me John, but he always called me Your Honor or Judge when addressing me while on the bench. That was typical of him, not just with me, but with any judge. And it was typical of him in addressing other lawyers in the courtroom. He had a very high standard. He was low-key in his approach, but well respected. And as I said, I don't think of anyone who was more respected by his peers than he was.
He was, as I say, always dignified, very professional, and of course he had a great deal more experience than I'd had at that time, and I learned a lot from him just by being against him. All lawyers learn a lot, and most of it from their opposition on how to deal with them. But you dealt with Karl on a straight-up basis. That is, you didn't try to snow him with your knowledge or your expertise. You respected him, but kept your back covered at all times. You never sat with your back to the window or in the corner, or your shadow might fall against the window. You know.
He's influenced in another way too, just in terms of my views of the legal profession. That it's a profession and not a business. And there aren't many people who would agree with that anymore. Most people think the law is just another business these days. And Karl was one of the ones who really was a profession. You know, he wasn't going to make boatloads of money doing it. He was going to be successful. He was going to be financially successful, but he wasn't going to allow sort of personal envy for maybe his client's success cause him to try to either overbill them or to put his interests ahead of theirs.
Karl Blanchard never went unnoticed for his legal achievements. In 1968, he was inducted as a Fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers, and he was honored nearly 4 decades later in 2006 with a Lifetime Achievement Award of Merit. At age 90, Karl received the award as he always received his honors, with a stoic look, a quiet gratefulness, and a humble attitude with his family behind him. In 2007, Karl was awarded the Ben Ely Jr. Award from the Missouri Organization of Defense Lawyers, recognizing his contributions to the insurance defense practice in the state of Missouri. He was on the Missouri Law School Foundation, a member of the Missouri Judicial Selection Committee, and president of the Jasper County Bar Association. He gave every job he undertook the same amount of undivided attention and always put honor and integrity first. He never went unnoticed for that either.
I learned from Mr. Blanchard at a very young age. I mean, that was my first legal job and my first experience as a trial attorney, that to become a successful trial attorney, there was no magic, there were no shortcuts. It was a matter of hard work, doing the hard work, taking the time to be prepared, and that there was no substitute, there were no other ways around it.
Of course, he's a very bright lawyer, had a fine legal mind. He was a very hard worker. I'm sure he was worked harder than I did at the practice. He put in long hours, and by reason of that, he became the fine trial lawyer that he was. And the same is true of Bob Schuyler.
If I was to look at a mentor who really wasn't my mentor, but was my mentor from afar, it would be Mr. Blanchard. Because by observing him and learning from his great ability, I think it helped me to be a better lawyer for my clients and a better advocate. And so I can say that he, in part, if I have been successful in the practice of law, that he played some role in that success by being a great teacher and an adversary on the other side. So
it was an extraordinary career, and the other thing, I was able to travel a lot, and everywhere I went in the state of Missouri, once they knew I came from Joplin, they'd say, "Well, do you know Karl Blanchard?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I do. He's my boss." They would say, "Well, he's just one of the finest trial lawyers there ever was." And I said, of course, I agreed, and felt fortunate to be able to learn from him, watch him, and he was highly, highly regarded all over the state. People in Joplin probably didn't really appreciate what a master of the art of trial that he was and how highly regarded he was. Always very understated when he would go to the meetings, even though he tried the biggest cases there were down here. If anybody asked him, he would claim that he only tried cases where cows were in the road and there were minor injuries. But he always had a funny story to tell you about.
He truly just kind of had an aura at the firm. And, you know, if he was good with something, it was okay. And if he had any question about something not being above board, he wouldn't do it.
He's the ultimate role model. And I don't care whether you're a lawyer or a doctor or a plumber, whether what it is you do for a living, whether you wash cars or pump gas, whatever it is you do in life, we all have a job in life, and we're all a professional at whatever that job does. And in terms of how you do it and the integrity and the honesty with which you do it and treat life, he's the ultimate role model.
Do you have any advice for young lawyers who might see this film?
I guess my advice is you're not going to learn a hell of a lot from what I said. Well, no, I'd say work hard, marry the boss's daughter.
From the day Karl stepped foot in Joplin in 1940, he established his reputation with his integrity, dedication to what was morally and legally right, and a work ethic which has become legendary. Legendary like the man himself who taught his employers, employees, and adversaries those golden values from the beginning of his career until the end.
What would you say you've learned from practicing law? What is the biggest thing you've learned in this career of yours?
Know the facts.
Know the facts.
Know the facts.